Hey everyone, welcome to the Anexipod, the official podcast for Anexinet. This is episode 39, recorded October 2nd, 2018. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Director of Cloud Solutions at Anexinet. Here on the Anexipod, we talk technology for the enterprise, covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. On this episode, we'll be discussing machine data and how it helps improve customer experience with Ben Newton, Director of Product Marketing at Sumo Logic. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I know we had a couple technical hurdles before we got started, but, hopefully those are ironed out for the day. It'll be something tomorrow, I'm sure. So before we discuss the topic of the day, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into IT?
Absolutely. I think I'm like a lot of other people in this field. I took a bit of a circuitous route. I actually started off studying science. I was in physics and doing work for my graduate degree in a lab, and then I realized that I liked the programming much better than I liked doing the experiments and reading research papers. So long story short, I actually switched over to computer science, and then arrived just in time to watch the .com boom explode in 2001. So that was fun.
Sure.
And basically did consulting for a few years. I always like to say that I did DevOps before DevOps was cool. We were trying to scale things. I was actually lived in DC and did a lot of work for the government, helping them figuring out these things early on, and then ended up moving into software in the mid 2000s and haven't looked back. I've been working at software companies off and on for I guess that's the last almost 15 years.
Wow, so the whole .com boom, you were part of that, and government work, that's always interesting. Are you allowed to talk about any of it, or would they come out and get you and take you away in the black helicopters?
I'd have to kill you, right? No, well, I did some work for the U.S. Army at Army Knowledge Online, which was a great experience because early on in the 2000s, the federal government was trying to really move strongly and use the internet to, service, taxpayers and service the, military members and their family. And so back then, the Army Knowledge Online was, one of the largest email services in the world because, the U.S. Army has, when you count up all the family members and veterans and all these kind of things, you had well over 1 million people that would potentially want to get to this internet service, and so we were kind of cutting edge for the time. Still they're doing a lot of things over there that are cutting edge in that realm. And I think Yahoo was the only email service, well that kind of dates it, but it's the only email service that was bigger, and that was a lot of fun. Learned a lot. Actually worked in an underground bunker for a few years, setting up the data center. That was a lot of fun.
Cool. All right, so today we want to talk a little bit about customer experience and also machine data. So let's start out with just sort of defining those concepts a little bit. So when we talk about discussing customer experience, what sort of elements make up customer experience?
It's a good question, and I think this has actually been changing over time. We've always had a concept of delivering a good experience for your customers. Way before the internet, way before modern, retail. It was, there's always been a concept, particularly in the U.S. more recently, that you would win customers by treating them well and by delivering value to them. So on some level, at a high level, it's really just how much do you understand about how your customers are experiencing your product, whatever that is, and how do you measure that? In the internet age, that has become a lot around a kind of end-to-end experience. Do you understand how your customers experience the product and the service that you're giving them? Do you understand how they're experiencing your sales team, how they're experiencing the purchase process, how they're experiencing the support process? A lot of those things all fold in, but typically, I think, particularly today, the pain points are a lot of times around when someone's actually coming to you to actually use your service or buy something from you, whatever it is. How's that experience? Are you actually turning them off? Are you attracting them to stay with you?
Right. I think of the meme, shut up and take my money. It's like, know when your customer's ready to spend and make it as frictionless as possible for them to spend money with you, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting if you go back to pre-internet days and you think about like customer service. Maybe you'd go into a corner shop to buy some milk or something, and that customer experience would be you talking to the clerk and them giving you what is hopefully a good bottle of milk, but then they don't have any knowledge or analytics around how good was the milk, how was your buying experience, how did you enjoy the milk when you got home, what did you make with it? Like, unless the person happened to ask you all those questions, but I think that really changes with the internet when there's so many more data points. And then the other thing that we were going to talk a little bit about was machine data. So if you just want to lay down sort of a loose definition for what you mean when you say machine data.
Yeah, sure. Well, and even going back to what you're a little talking about, I think there's kind of a continuum here that I think we, as everyone is, we tend to be more inclined towards, our modern perspective and what we've done. But I've always been a history buff, and what's interesting is that there's been various different versions of this. Back in the late 19th century, you had the Sears robot catalog started up. You had lots of other companies that were saying, okay, well, back then, if you were not in a city, you only had one store that you could buy stuff from. And so they figured that they could disrupt that by actually shipping these catalogs out to people. And I mean, it was crazy. In the Sears Roebuck catalog, you could actually order a house. You could order a wagon. You could order just about anything. And what was interesting is they pioneered that. They pioneered, ad sales. They pioneered, a lot of marketing about marketing specific things. There weren't all the protections back then, so they would claim, everything from curing cancer to, making you smarter or whatever it was. But
sure.
They really experimented with getting directly to the consumer, and that has changed over time, because then you moved from that to department stores. Late 19th century, early 20th century. You move from that into malls in the 50s and 60s. And later than that, about bringing people. And all this was about, I think, was about trying to get more to the customer at a lower cost and compete. And so, to me, what the internet did is it just focused that and gave a new platform for that. So when you had Amazon come into that realm, where for example, like book sales were being dominated by Barnes and Noble and Borders. I don't know if people still remember that, but you had these big. And what were they doing? They were reducing their costs, and they were getting stuff at lower cost and delivering an experience to their customers. And then Amazon came along and said, you know what? We can actually do this even lower costs, even at even greater scale through the internet. So really, it's just we're repeating a lot of the same things, but now what the internet has done is made. I would just, at least in my mind, I feel like Amazon or Walmart.com or something like these are just different versions of the Sears and Roebuck catalog from the late 1800s. It's the same concept. It's just being delivered at scale and in real time. And I think that if we didn't bring back to your other question about machine data, so really machine data is just it's the data. Like one of the definitions I like to talk about is like it's the data exhaust of all your stuff, of all your your applications, your devices, and all these different devices and applications, and the cloud, quote unquote, are generating all this data, right? And it's absolutely crazy how much data it's generating. It's really changed, since we were talking how I started out, in 2003. I remember we were just super excited with ourselves when we were buying EMC storage, and that's when NetApp first started, which they're kind of stalwarts now, but we were super excited that we had 70 terabytes of storage, and that was a big deal back then. Now we use a statistic at Sumo Logic where it's from Barclays. I think it was by 2020, if I'm right, but it was going to be 16 zettabytes of machine data was going to be produced, and that's the equivalent. And this will just blow your mind. Like nobody knows what a zettabyte is.
Right.
I mean, let's just be honest with ourselves. But that's the equivalent of watching the Netflix catalog 30 million times. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. And
Wow.
so really the question in this modern age is like how people are going to use that data. Is, when the guys were producing catalogs, they only knew, like to your point, they only knew how you were doing if you wrote them a letter, or you did an op-ed and said, hey, it
Right.
sucks. But now you've got this real-time data from your customers. Are you actually going to use that to improve your service, or are you actually just going to ignore it?
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to pick apart a little bit there is the idea that, AWS came in and said, hey, brick and mortar stores, that's nice, but we're going to make this bigger, we're going to scale out, and we're going to compete on cost. That's our primary
Hmm.
cost and convenience. That's our differentiator. And they were able to do that and build what is almost $1 trillion business in terms of market
Yeah,
cap, right? I think they briefly crested over $1 trillion for like a day and then dropped back below, but
but it's really big.
yeah, really big. But then you have, I mean, the barrier to entry for digital services is very low. Like anybody can spin up a website and start doing, some level of e-commerce. So customers can be saturated with options, and it's easy to go with the commodity option like AWS. But like, how does a company keep and acquire new customers when they can't compete at the global scale of AWS?
That's a great question, because I think that's the key, because if you view Amazon just in that sequence of retailers, and these big companies, Walmart did that to all the retailers. What did retailers have to do when Walmart came into town? A lot of them, if they were just the local hardware store that was basically selling everything more expensive than you would buy in the Walmart, they weren't going to survive. And a lot of those stores would go out of business. Or, when Best Buy came into town, it'd be, I'm the local computer repair shop. Well, you have a 20% markup from Best Buy, and so like, why would I go to you? So what did a lot of those stores do? A lot of these small towns would revitalize by specializing and providing a better experience. Why now would you go into the downtown? Because I'm from the southeast, and a lot of these, southeastern towns, a lot of the local mom and pop retailers got put out of business by Walmart. But what happened was is that the towns that succeeded is they said, okay, I'm going to do a store that's very specific. It's like this is a store about olive oil store. I remember that was when it first like really hit me. I went into a store and the entire store was olive oil. That would have been inconceivable in the 80s when I grew up, right? But
Right.
that's the age we're in now. Is that's how you compete? Is you're providing a different experience. So I think that's the same formula now applies in the internet age, and and it's where we're living now. Is that I don't think you don't compete based on your ability to run microservices or run containers or run these fancy, whatever fancy technical term it is you're using now. They're running those at scale, because the reality, you can run a crap service at scale and you're still going to lose customers. The question now is, how are you combining that with good old customer experience, actually treating your customers well? And that's why I think you see now that Amazon and Microsoft and Google and Apple are switching from just pure scale, and now what are they investing in? They're investing in artificial intelligence, they're investing in machine learning, they're investing in like all these, text to speech and speech to text. And why are they doing that? They're trying to get closer to you and trying to tie tighter with you, to connect you tighter to their brand. So they want now you to, and Apple's been a good example of that. They want you to be tied to their brand. So I think that's where the customer experience angle comes in. Is like, how do you, if you want to compete against an Amazon or Walmart or a Google, whatever it is, you have to provide a differentiated experience, and it's assumed that it's going to be at scale. It's assumed that it's going to be on my mobile phone. It's assumed that it's going to be 24/7. That's the table stakes now. It's like, how are you going to deliver personalization at scale? Like, how are you going to make me feel special? And to give you a perfect example of this from my own personal experience. So I'm a musician, and I started recently buying a few kind of audio musical things online, and I'm a huge Amazon fan, so of course that was the first place I went, whether that was the right decision or not. And honestly, Amazon does not do well at that. They rely on third-party providers, and they did not deliver a great experience. They actually ship something the box was all messed up, and actually like this like microphone stand was broken.
Hmm.
And I tried this other retailer, a place called it's called Sweetwater, which is kind of new one, but it was a personalized experience.
Yep.
It was, and they're much smaller, but they won my business because I'm paying a little bit more than Amazon, but I know that they're taking care of me. They ask me questions. I actually ordered a guitar and then went back in. I'm like, crap. Like, I told my wife what I ordered. She's like, you don't want that. That's an ugly color. And I'm like, you're right. So I went in and called them back, and they're like, no problem. Let me talk you through it. Think about it. And that's the kind of thing that people are expecting. You know, that's how you're going to win, is by providing that kind of experience. But to do that, you have to understand your customers, which is where the machine data comes in, because you have to be able to use that data to understand your customers.
Right, absolutely. The reason I laughed about the Sweetwater thing is because that's where I actually ordered all of the audio equipment for our studio. And it was very similar reasons, right? It was that customized experience. I had questions about the mic preamp that I wasn't sure about, and they were able to like jump on chat and help me through the process. Same thing like when I went to go buy my car stereo. I could have bought my new car stereo through Amazon, but instead I chose to buy it through another site called Crutchfield, and that's because same tailored experience to someone who's trying to buy a car stereo and wants to make sure it fits, that it's all the right parts, that I'm not going to get like halfway through the installation and go, oh man, I don't have this part, and now my car is like lying in pieces and I need to wait 2 days for it to ship. And now they send me, some messages and stuff, but I think they could be doing a better job, and a lot of that is collecting the reams of interesting data out there, and then some external data sources, and creating insights and opportunities to, engage with me. You mentioned the store selling olive oil, and the phrase that I've heard is that data is the new oil. And just like oil, raw data is only really good for making a mess. So that data that's being collected, that needs to be refined, like oil, right?
Yeah.
So how do you see analytics helping companies be more competitive in this new digital economy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, because I think when you looked at the early part of the internet age, and when these companies were coming up, and when big data really started becoming a thing, it was all about structured data. And what I mean by that is that people were spending time to pre-structure the data and think about it, and get into a certain structure. But the problem was that it took too long. And so, to your exact point there, like how you're going to be tied to these brands is how they react to you. Do they understand you? A lot of it's just old-fashioned, be nice, treat somebody with respect.
Yeah.
That stuff will never change, right? But there's also like, what if they knew more about you? Like when you're on the phone, it's like, hey, I know you've done X, Y, and Z, or like I see that you told us this before. And so before, a lot of what was happening is that they were creating these very specialized databases to do this, and you would see back to the old stories. Like I always remember the one from Target that apparently they were able to predict that this teenage girl was having a baby because of her purchases, and her dad didn't know, and he got very mad about that. But and that was like in that early stage. But the problem was that was very lagging, and the reality now is that this is a hyper competitive space, just like you're kind of pointing at. Is now things change in minutes and hours. You can lose a customer in seconds, so you have to do it really fast. So with a lot of this, you don't have the time to go back and think through all the implications of your data strategy. So a lot of times what's happening is even newer companies that are kind of born in this age, including like, Symologic where I'm at, you may have thought something was a good idea a little while ago, and then, now things have changed. So you need to be able to adjust very rapidly. And I think that's how analytics has changed. It's gone from, okay, let me put some thought into this, let me create this, big fancy database and work through all the options and think about it, and I'm willing to wait a week for results to serve my customer. Now, it's like, you know what? My developers are going to shovel this stuff as fast as they can. They're going to get it out there, and I need to be able to change my mind about the questions I want to ask and have answered as I'm going along. And that's one of the reasons why, you're seeing some of these techniques that were prevalent, on the IT and security side around, log analytics and these kind of more unstructured data analytics is what it really is. Those coming into prominence because all those tools that, allowed you to kind of ask any question you want to the data are now super valuable to other parts of the business. So that's where sometimes we set a term here that we call it like the analytics economy. But what that really means is that the companies that are succeeding right now are the ones that are able to collect, process that, that new data oil that's being, shooting out of the ground, in a, giant, geyser, you respect, and they're trying to basically tap that and use it as fast as possible, and they don't have time to do, fancy data tricks. They need to just get their hands around it and try to learn as they go. So to do that, you need tools that can be really, really flexible, and the companies that can leverage that data and build the analytics and move fast are the ones that are going to win and differentiate. The ones that spend all their time kind of spinning their wheels trying to do it, do kind of the old way, they'll end up failing or having blind spots. And so that your perfect example there with Crutchfield, I'm sure, not knowing, I mean, those guys have been around for a long time. Maybe one of the things they're doing is they don't have access to all that data. Like when they're dealing with you as a customer, they may be dealing with a more standard sets of data that are coming through these standard channels. They're not actually looking at your activity on their website and seeing that in real time. So it's a very different experience when you can. I remember I was talking to one of our customers and he's just talking about how a customer could call in and they could be like, "Oh, I had this problem. I thought you deleted this file that I uploaded to your service." Well, actually, sir, it was actually this other person on your team that deleted it. Let me restore that for you. That's a completely different experience, but that's only possible when you have access to that machine data, when you actually have access and you can process it really quickly and then give access to the people who need it when they're in front of a customer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it bears repeating that the whole concept of these highly structured databases and like sort of workflows, and it's not even AI, right? It's just like if-then sort of statements. That's not very flexible. It's almost fragile. And if anything changes about the customer or their interactions or something, the system can't be updated fast enough to take advantage of that new information. Whereas something that's more of an unstructured data and a faster analysis process that uses something like real machine learning might actually be able to glean those insights faster and keep up with changing data feeds and changing information and find new patterns, right?
Yeah, and you got to be able to go back and reinterpret your questions because you might, I've seen this, now here being on the, delivering a service, and I worked in product management for years here at Sumo Logic, and one of the things I would see happen is we go into the data and we answer the question a certain way, and then we go back, like, well, actually, I wonder about this. And then we would go back and ask that different question. It might be like, I just released a new product. I can see this being adopted. Well, I wonder who's adopting it. Like we were even doing things like, just to give you a fun example, like we had our first user conference last year. And we've been analyzing, how our customers use the product for a long time and kind of learning over that. And our customer success team, will go to customers and give them, options about how to improve their experience of the product. And that's all built off of us learning how to use the machine data. But one of the things we did last year, we said, oh, well, what if we took the list of people that attended our conference and then matched that against some of the activity we're seeing in the system and then see if actually attending the conference improved their experience of the product and improved them using the product. And we were able to show conclusively that we saw them using more parts of the product, we saw them using it more often, and we could show a direct line between them, going to training and going to this user conference and then getting better experience out of the product. And that's where it really comes together, and it's really interesting because you take this data that is usually locked in IT and in security or in these like, operational teams, saying like customer, did this action in the product, and then taking that and connecting that to a business outcome in a way that your marketing or your sales or your customer-facing people can understand and then use with your customers. That's where That's where the power and the differentiation comes in. If you can do that and you can connect those dots, then you've suddenly 10x'd your, ability to, acquire and retain, new customers, because you can make those connections. Like another example from a customers I've been around for a long time. I originally went in and helped them solve an operations problem. Basically keep the app from crashing. Just simple stuff. And then we went in and I realized, and this was for a company called TuneIn that makes a really cool radio app, and went in and turned out that they had in that same data that was used to see if the service was up, is like, hey, there's actually something in there about radio stations. What if I created you a dashboard with the top radio stations by geo, I think is what it was. And I didn't think much of it at the time, and I gave it to them. And they was like, this is cool. But it turned out their marketing team loved it. And then the marketing team started using it on a regular basis. And then, later on, the marketing team got so sophisticated, from what I understand, they even would change their ad buys based on how listening patterns were changing in radio stations. So that marketing team could not tell you hide nor tail, I'm sure, about machine data and about logs. Like they probably don't even care, but they do care about the fact that they can understand what their customers are doing and then change their marketing behavior and ad spends to actually basically take advantage of a changing trend in the market. That's what's really super interesting.
Yeah, wow, that's a great example. I mean, the two things that I see as being like big challenges around this is, one, how do I ingest the amount of data that's flying at me? Right, you called it data exhaust, right? All the stuff that's being created, whether it's oil or exhaust or whatever analogy we want to use, we're producing an awful lot of it. And so there needs to be a way to ingest all of that. And then the second big thing is, how do I even begin to analyze this stuff? I mean, I feel like I need to be a data scientist or something to approach this huge heap of data. But I mean, some of the example you just gave was marketing people just, you threw a dashboard together for them and suddenly they had insights they didn't even know about, and they didn't need an advanced degree. So how do we ingest all this stuff, and then how do we analyze it?
Well, on the first part, I mean, that's part of the beauty of the technology that's come out of the cloud transition, is that very same set of technologies that allow you to scale quickly, if you build an application in the cloud, or what, allows a service like, Sumo Logic. I mean, that's one of the things we started in 2010, so we were able to take advantage of that technology, be able to, rapidly scale collections. So, we could have somebody, we've had examples where, a customer actually had 10x the response rate to a marketing campaign they did, and, we were able to scale up, really easily for them. And that's a basic, tenet of cloud architecture. So the technology is at the point now where, for the companies that can, actually do that and take advantage of that, you can actually really scale very easily. The difference is, I think this is part of things, like, do you want to do that internally yourself, or do you want to have a service to do that? So that's kind of a question of, where you want to be spending your time. But, the ability to be able to effortlessly scale in Amazon, scale storage and scale, inputs and outputs, is, we've been able to use as a service to scale from the collection side. So a lot of it's just about providing as many inputs as absolutely possible, allowing people to basically throw stuff at some sort of, input point, and just don't worry about how it's getting there. Just shovel it as fast as you can. Don't worry about, getting everything perfect. And you can process it later, and that's the key. And then once you got in the product, to your point, and to me, that's honestly the most fascinating thing going on right now. It's like we've had a lot of technological innovations around scaling, like what I just talked about, is being able to scale, over, local regions and even internationally, and with a, snap of the fingers. I mean, that's pretty amazing. But that's kind of that's basically the state of the landscape now. That's just expected. That's table stakes. Now, what's interesting is that, okay, so you think about that marketing team in the story I just told, or here we have our customer success team, our sales team. They desperately want access to this data because, they can see how valuable it's going to be. But the problem is that they're not experts. So So you kind of have a couple different things going on, I think, that are really interesting. One, you have this transition in the data science field because, typically in the past you had these data scientists there. We have some here. There's, ones here, some of the smartest people I've ever met, PhDs in computer science or something related. And they can go out and build these incredibly complicated models, but they're very hard to find, and they will continue to be hard to find. Not everybody's going to go get a PhD in computer science. So you may have a small number of those, but most companies may not be able to afford or may not be able to build a data science team. So now you have these other roles that are emerging, like data engineer and data analyst that are, it's kind of the same thing that's happened with computer science in general. You've gone from having, highly, educated specialists to people that are more generalists that can come in and actually make it, practical. So I think you're seeing these new roles in organizations are able to take advantage of it. And then you're also seeing that these traditional teams that own the data, so maybe it's your IT teams or your operations team or your security team, they own this data. They now have an opportunity to actually act as a data broker. And so they can either make the mistake of saying, hey, we don't want to share this data, we're going to make it really hard for you, and then, honestly, like different parts of the business are going to be like, honestly, screw you, we're going to go do it ourselves, and then now you've got this fragmentation. Or they have the opportunity now to say, hey, we are going to act as a subject matter expert in how you do analytics. We'll basically run this as a service, and then we will create, easy to consume things for you to use. So we'll create, form drop downs instead of writing complicated query language, or we'll give you a dashboard with pretty pictures on it with easy to understand analytics. So I think that's the fascinating thing you're seeing right now. This is not about every single function in the company going and hiring data scientists, and it's not even necessarily about building a data science team. It's about basically building specialities and building areas of expertise within the traditional kind of technical areas of a company and inside of these IT-oriented functions, operations-oriented functions, and saying, okay, we're now going to empower marketing, product management, engineering, all these different groups with access to this data, give it to them in a way they can consume in real time, and then work with them to basically, and potentially even send it different places. So like the data scientists are going to want to go play in their Jupyter notebooks and do their fancy models, and the marketing team wants to put a big dashboard on the wall.
Sure.
That's fine. So I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the innovation, I think, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, is how do you enable these teams without them having to be experts?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think it's going to be tricky at first, and there's going to be a lot of sort of kludgy interfaces, but it sounds like the example that you gave with being able to set up that marketing dashboard within Sumo Logic, was that a native thing within Sumo Logic that you set up, or is that like a third-party thing for the dashboard?
No, and I mean, no, that's a native thing. So I mean, that's a lot of what we've been doing at Sumo Logic in the last year or so. Is that we've been trying to make it easier to enable other parts of your company. So we made it easier to share dashboards and easier to collaboratively build content. We made it easier to provide just a URL. Like if your CEO wants access, and we have actually, believe it or not, we have a lot of CEOs, CTOs, CIOs that actually look at dashboards off of the nerdy machine data all the time. Samsung SmartThings, one of our customers, I think, fantastic use case. They say that 95% of their employees either directly or indirectly look at machine data. I mean, it's absolutely amazing, but they don't log in and run a query most of the time. They're looking at a dashboard, or they're consuming a report or something like that. And I think that's a big part of that transition. And the other piece that we did more recently is how you can create kind of customized interfaces for people. So we created something called search templates, but really the idea is that you can have an expert that could go in and say, okay, our customer support team is on the phone with the customer. What do they need to know? What do they need to know from the customer? Well, they need to know username, and they need to know time frame, and they need to know maybe the product they're using or something like that. So what you do is you make those drop downs, pre-filled drop downs inside of a form, and then the customer support agent goes in and picks the drop down and clicks go, and then suddenly sees a nice report saying, oh, well, the customer did these 5 things. Okay, now I can help you. And so I think that's that's where we're spending a lot of time there too. And then you have these like other use cases where we just announced an integration with Jupyter Notebooks, which was why that was top of mind. But a lot of companies are going to want to data scientists want to do it their way. They want to go. They're going to go build their data models. They're going to build their machine learning models, and they're going to go. And that's totally fine. So the benefit they get from an analytics platform is they don't have to worry about collecting the data. They don't have to worry about processing and forming and sculpting the data. All they basically just connect to an API, pull it out, and then they use that data in their, combined with other data sources they're getting, and go build a really cool model. But they don't have to worry about all of those, more, kind of painful functions of actually collecting and processing the data, and they can worry just about building their models and delivering value to the business.
Right, yeah. So at Anexinet, we have a machine learning task force. They call themselves Project Malta, which is fun, and they do a whole demo around Jupyter Notebooks and using, I think, SageMaker and AWS to do some interesting analytics. I'd never seen Jupyter Notebooks before that demonstration, and I was like, wow, that is really cool technology to be able to write sort of code in line, but it's very interactive and friendly, at least friendly on a tech level. The information that he was able to pull out and process in very short order was really cool. So Sumo Logic is also doing an integration with Jupyter Notebooks that would allow. Yeah. I guess what's the use case or an example of a cool thing that's been done with that?
Well, I think that's what's kind of emerging now, because typically a company like ours, our traditional core base of users were in IT operations, DevOps, developers, engineering, and security, those type of functions. And so we're just seeing more demand from our own customers to do, their data scientist functions. I've had multiple conversations, a lot more recently, just about data scientists being like, hey, I really have a hard time finding the data I need. Where do I go now? Okay, well, it looks like there's some really cool data over there, but I don't know how to get to it. So there's a lot of that kind of processing. And typically in the past it would be like, let me put it into a business intelligence or a BI tool. And I don't think that's what's going on now. Is that this is a way for these data scientists to get access to another data source. And that's kind of the key now. It's all about open platforms. So it's not about being proprietary and trying to force people to do things your way. It's about providing an open and an open API kind of framework where people can kind of get to the data they need when they need it. And then one of the things that was pushing is because our own data scientists were building. They use Jupyter Notebooks. They use Apache Zeppelin. They use these different tools to build their own models. And so what has changed in the last couple of years, and this is like this whole kind of revolution that's going on. It's not about building a closed garden where people kind of come onto your platform and they kind of have to do things your way. It's about providing ways for them to access and process the data in the way that makes most sense to them. So our machine learning team is we produce a report every year that's actually built using these tools. I mean, we extract it and build it using these type of tools, and then we build this nice glossy report. Or we'll do internal analysis to see who our users are. Like we were able to show that like what I'm just saying about different parts of the company adopting the technology, where we were able to show that and do the analysis. And so we're using it to better understand our own customers, and that's again, that comes back to the whole discussion of why I think the customer experience thing is so important here. Is like a lot of times these data scientists are the ones that are actually building the models to better understand customer behavior. But the problem is that they don't have access to enough data to do good predictions. And so machine data is now this new gold mine of data for them to tap into that they may not have had access to, and then they can add that to the data sources they already know and love and get a better picture of what's going on.
Wow, yeah, and I love the idea of sort of democratizing the analytics platform. So you do have your deep data scientists that want to do machine learning and all that, but they don't always have like the full picture of what's actually important to the company. And so it's great that marketing folks and the CMO or the CIO would be able to go and say, well, that's interesting, data scientist, but what would actually move the needle would be if you could give us more information about this, and maybe I can sort of drive some of that myself in a dashboard. That is, I think, where you can see some leaps in the customer experience is when you've got the collective knowledge of the entire organization and not just one data scientist in an ivory tower pecking away with a Jupyter notebook.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I mean, when you can have a sales rep, and I've seen this happen, go to a customer and say, hey, it looks like a couple of some of your users are struggling and not getting great performance out of it. How about you tell them, how about we send you to training? We give you free training and help you guys be more productive. Like that kind of connection is the kind of thing that, keeps customers coming back to you and being able to make those put that information at the fingertips of the people who actually talk to customers every day, which frankly is not engineers. It's not data scientists. It's the sales people, the marketing people, the product people, the sales engineers, the people like that. And giving them access to this is it revolutionizes the way that you can handle your customers and improve your customer experience.
Wow. Well, I think that is a great note to wrap up on. Ben, if people want to know more about you, what you're up to, what more information about Sumo Logic and all of this customer experience stuff, is there somewhere they can go to download information or follow you?
Absolutely. So, for one, on the customer experience thing, a lot of this came out. We actually commissioned a report from 451 Research this summer, so definitely go check that on sumologic.com. You can find that in our resource center. And it's basically called improving customer experience in the analytics economy. So it's definitely exactly what we talked about. And you can see more about us at sumologic.com. And I would definitely suggest I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. On Twitter on BENOIT Newton, Benoit Newton. So definitely check me out there. And the great thing is I love podcasts because I have my own podcast. So come check out at mastersofdata.com. We talk about this stuff all the time, so I would love anybody who wants to check that out. Come check us out at mastersofdata.com.
Great. I will make sure to include links to that in the show notes. Last question. I like to ask this for everybody. What is your favorite 80s movie?
That is easy. It's The Goonies. No contest.
Great choice. All right. Well, Ben Newton, thank you so much for being on the Anexipod.
Thank you for having me.
And that was our show with Ben Newton. Thanks to the marketing team for helping me pull this together. Thanks to Anexinet for helping me produce this podcast. If you're looking for a company to help you with your digital transformation, then I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet, see how they can help. If you've enjoyed this episode of Anexipod, why not leave a nice review on iTunes? If you're looking for more content, you can check out our sister podcast, Buffer Overflow. On the show, I am joined weekly by my co-host Chris Hainer to discuss what's new and interesting in the IT news sphere. You can find out more about me and what I'm up to on Twitter at Ned1313 or on my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.